Hi, welcome to Leadership Untitled with Kareen Turner. That is me. Welcome to episode 24. I am a leadership coach. I help women leaders kick the performance habit once and for all so that they can focus on building influence to increase their visibility, to refine their leadership skills, and gain momentum in their careers. And that's what this podcast is about. In today's episode, we're talking about that careful dance that happens when you take on a new team, whether that is in your current organization, whether that is you leaving to go to a new organization. It's a balance of figuring out how to navigate that journey. The reason I hesitated when I said dance, and like, can I continue the analogy? Do I know enough about dancing to put that out there? But we'll see. Before we begin, can we take a moment? I'm looking at my monitor here. Can we take a moment for the head wrap? Because when I move up, you can't see all of it. So let's take a moment for the head wrap before we move on. If you're listening to me, you can't see, obviously. So you can join either live on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook every day, every Wednesday, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Or you can certainly watch the replays of the live. But this is one, if you want to see my head wrap, to go ahead and find me. It's Leadership Untitled on YouTube, and on LinkedIn, you can find me, Kareen Turner. Okay, we're done with the preliminaries. As I said, we're here to talk about about that journey of navigating taking on a new team, whether again that's in your current organization or you are moving into a new organization, into a new role. No matter how long you've been in corporate, even if that's just a month or 2 months or 3 months or 20 plus years, you have experienced what it's like to go through a transition of welcoming in new leadership, or you yourself being a leader who is moving into a new role. And you understand because you have experienced just the transition and the shifts, the changes that occur with it. But there isn't a lot of discussion that I hear or that I have seen around best practices for managing that transition excellently. And that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share my strategies. I'm going to share what I know has worked not just for me, but as I've shared with my clients, as I've heard what clients have shared with me, as I've talked to other colleagues. These are strategies, boots on the ground, that work. They may take varying degrees of time to work, but they do work. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. I've been on both sides. I have been, well, previous to what I'm doing now, which is running my own company. I was in corporate for 15-ish years in my latest career. Before that, I worked in a corporate environment for probably 6 or 7-ish years. So over 20 years in corporate environment. So I have definitely experienced the transition of new leaders as early as even 1 month into a new role. And it might not have been your direct leader, but a leader of another department or the CEO of the organization. And all of those changes all of those leaves when a leader leaves, there you go. When a leader leaves, it causes a ripple effect. So it might not be in your department, it might not be someone who you report to directly, but as leaders, we in our managerial function are responsible for planning, organizing, directing, recruiting, leading all of those managerial leadership functions. We direct and guide them. And so it's naive to say that there isn't an impact. And if there, for some reason, isn't at all an impact, then you have to start thinking about, well, what was that leader doing that they could leave and there isn't a ripple effect or anything that happens in their absence. So as I said, I've been on both sides. I'll start with the side of early career, experiencing the shifts in having leaders leave. One organization that I worked for, within 4 years, there were four different CEOs. And then I myself, the person who I reported to, changed 5 times in 4 years. If you can imagine the whiplash of projects changing, of priorities shifting, this project is being shelved, we're launching this initiative. We're going to pivot and go back to that initiative. Well, I didn't really understand where the previous person was going at, or the previous leader was going. It wasn't leading to results. So we're going to now do something. We're going to do a 180. Sometimes they felt like 360s where you're like, we're just back to where we started this journey a year or so ago. So there was a tremendous time of change, a tremendous amount of emotion during those 4 years. They were so incredibly intense. Again, it's not just, and I reported to the C suite, different C suite positions. So they're changing, the CEO is changing. And when you have changes at that level, at senior leadership so frequently, it is painful. And your head does feel like it's just rotating because things are changing so much. And because one leader leaves and you were doing things a certain way, reporting things a certain way, or there was an agreement as to how processes were happening or responsibilities were being executed, well, that leader leaves. Now you're looking at a new leader and they're, well, why are you doing things this way? And you're being questioned, you're being doubted. And that can be also incredibly angering and triggering. It is during these early parts of my career that I learned the importance of documenting. Listen, if you don't have a if you don't have a solid documentation system, and that's a journal, that's email, it is across the board, you have to get better at documenting. That is leadership 101, team member 101. But it is where I learned the importance of documenting. It's like being forged through fire. Learn the importance of documentation, keeping track of conversations, not just again in my notebook, but via email, very tangible, very formal communication processes. That's the phrase I was looking for. Formal communication processes. It's also during this time that I developed a lot of my thought leadership, my leadership style. It's how this podcast, became an idea in my mind a few years ago because of this intense experience. And also experiences before that. This was the most intense in terms of the people who I reported to shifting and changing so much. Whenever a leader leaves, no matter their title, it upsets a routine. Even if that leader is toxic, even if that leader contributed to unhealthy behaviors that led to a poor environment, poor culture, when they leave, certainly there's a sigh of relief, but there's also trauma to work through, workplace trauma to work through now. The trust for anyone coming in is significantly decreased and diminished. You are dealing with people who have built up systems to just operate. And so now, at the thought of having to let those systems go, they are panicking. And there's change, there's an adjustment period. If it's a well-loved leader, there's sadness, there's grief. Even in a toxic relationship, there could be grief. A toxic leader relationship, there's grief as well, as you recognize how your behavior may have changed, how much your personality may have changed, your character, your integrity. No matter the type of leader who leaves, it is an adjustment. And that is the first thing to recognize. That's my first tip. That's a bonus tip because it's actually not on my list of strategies. So that's a bonus. It's recognizing that there is emotion involved, no matter the situation that you are stepping into. Now, I've also been on the other side where I have taken on new roles within an organization and, of course, left companies to go into new leadership roles as well. The one that I'm going to share with you, because I love sharing some stories during this podcast, so it's story time. This one was particularly traumatizing, and I use that word deliberately because it was, and I will share why as I tell the story, but it was quite a few years ago, and I'm watching my words because while I was treated so highly disrespectfully in during that time period, I still want to, even though it's been years, we're years removed, I still want to address it, address the situation, address what happened, and share in a way that still respects my integrity. I don't want to ever dip down and be like someone else who is disrespectful. So I want to be sure that as I share for learning, that I don't do anything out of character or that I don't reveal too much. Not to protect the person, but to protect the situation as a whole, because there were a lot of people involved. So, again, it was a few years ago when my leader approached me and said, "Hey, we want you to take on two departments, sorry, two departments. So not just one, but two." And when he shared the teams that he wanted me to take on, my response initially was no. These are those were areas that I didn't have direct expertise in or a skill set in. And they were also some of the most on the outside, they appeared like some of the most troubled departments um, in our organization. There's a lot going on. So that's probably a lot to say, but from my experience and my interaction with those departments, and I interacted heavily with them, there was tension. And it wasn't just my department, it was other colleagues sharing the same experiences. So you can imagine, my leader, my boss sitting and saying like, what are your thoughts on taking these two teams on? And I was like, no. At most I would take one, and I shared the one that I would feel comfortable taking on. And then I was voluntold that this would be happening, that the question basically was a courtesy. But I had at least shared my thoughts. That was his question. What are your thoughts? And I shared my thoughts. This is also a time where I learned how important leadership skills are, that you don't need to have necessarily direct expertise, because there are a lot of teams that I have taken on during that time and since then that I don't have direct expertise in. And as you move up in your career, you will have less and less direct expertise of all of the teams, the departments that report to you, because you have enabled leaders who have that expertise to direct those teams and their everyday operations. And really your job is focusing on, how can I help them feel safe, be productive, work towards the goals, um, motivate, strategize your leadership changes. And that is something that I know I have struggled with. Again, clients, colleagues who I've spoken with, letting go of the fact that you may not be able to directly jump in to help, like actually type things or fix things. And that as you are moving up in your career, that may have been how you were able to get promotions, is that you have direct expertise and you feel like the further you get away from it, like what's happening. I encourage you to embrace that process. Of course, talk to a coach as well, to help with that transition, but that you need to focus on now building your leadership skills, focusing on, manager functions, planning, organizing, directing, recruiting, and building those skills up so that you're prepared to move to the next level. So that was an aside. In this situation, again, didn't have any experience in those areas, and so I said no. I was told, yes, you will be leading the teams. I was like, okay. I at the time was working with a coach, and thankfully, I had developed the mindset and had been working on the mindset already of being ready for change. And so a I was able to be prepared and create a plan for this transition. Because again, it wasn't just one team, it was two teams, and they were both troubled. They were both mired in conflict. And this is also an example of the performance trap, where we think that if we take on more and more and more, that will be recognized. Well, I wasn't. My title didn't change. I did get a small bump, but for what was being requested of me, spoken to people in HR, definitely should have been a title change with the portfolio that I already had, as well as a more significant salary increase. Another digression. When it was announced that I would be taking on that team, someone who a working relationship with, it was professional, who was on that team, wrote the resignation letter of all resignation letters. You know, I I can laugh about it now, but it was so highly disrespectful in the moment what was in that letter, and the actions also of my leader at the time. And we've worked through that because I at that time had found my voice. Um, but when you talk about burning a bridge, this letter was, I'm dousing the bridge with gasoline, I'm lighting a match, I'm adding more wood to the bridge to be sure that it burns thoroughly. That was this resignation letter. It was uncalled for. It was highly unprofessional, and as I said, extremely disrespectful. And that's what I'm walking into. I haven't actually even done anything. It's just the announcement. That is the environment that I was walking into. If you have looked at my LinkedIn profile at all, part of my personal brand is, or my professional brand is, being a fixer, which I know can have a negative connotation, but it's a fixer in terms of being able to walk into environments that are rife with conflict and turning them around to mend fractured teams, build relationships, develop thriving culture, create safe spaces that then lead to team members that are productive, moving from the red into black. That is what I developed over my time in corporate America. And even with that, even with the ability to walk in incredibly tense situations, again, leading through conflict, this was a trying time. I was 6 weeks pregnant with my second daughter. I was doing my best to manage stress levels. I had a young child, like she was 1. She was still 1. My older daughter was still 1 at the time, maybe 1.5. So managing a lot and having to take on 2 troubled teams and one seemed to be especially on fire. And it's interesting because it's the team that I had said I would prefer not to take. I would take the other team. Thanks. And that proved to have been wise on my part, but here I was. We often talk about how important it is for leaders to build trust. That is that is the foundation of our effectiveness as leadership is building genuine relationships, building trust. What we don't talk a lot about on the other side is what happens when you as a leader have lost trust in either some of your team or all of your team. What is that stress like? And that's where I was in that situation. I certainly didn't have trust for the person who had resigned and left that same day. So, also leaving your team in a lurch, who was also already short staffed. It was just not a good situation. But now, knowing that other team members, at least other team members felt that way, wondering which team members did and how was I going to navigate, wondering if more resignation letters are going to come in, wondering what they were going to say falsely about me. And the expectation is that as leaders, even in these situations, that we have to show up still ready to lead, ready to motivate, ready to bring our personal selves into the workplace. And it's extremely vulnerable. And there isn't enough discussion about what leaders need to do to build themselves up, the support systems that they need, because it is a lot of taking from a leader. And how are we working to replenish that leader's um, bucket? I can't think of the word. How are we replenishing that leader? How are we filling them up? So it is incredibly important that if you don't have a strong support team as a leader, that you find one, that you are, um, that you have a trusted community of colleagues, of family, friends, working, of course, with a coach, a therapist, whatever it is that you need to do, because the expectation is greater, the burden, the responsibility is greater on the leader. And it requires more of you showing up as yourself. And when you're showing up as yourself, when you are bringing who you are authentically, in a previous episode, I spoke about that. When you're showing up authentically as yourself, how are you also ensuring that you are rebuilding and replenishing your stores, your energy stores, your soul stores, your love stores, whatever it is? How are you finding ways to build it? Because it's in these situations, it is these events, situations like these, that contribute to overwhelm and burnout. It is not always your task load, it is not always productivity. It can be culture and environment. And as leaders, we have to be mindful of that we are not putting ourselves consistently into situations where we are, sharing and giving, but not finding ways to replenish. This podcast has been filled with digression. So I thank you for holding on and staying here. But it's important conversations. The transition, that dance that happens when you are taking on a new team, when you are, welcoming in a new leader, whatever the situation is, it is a dance. And it's important to recognize all of the elements that come into it. So that situation, eventually, the the worst part of it happened at the beginning, thankfully, of the story that I was sharing. That was the worst of it, but the letting go and trust building process took months. And as I'm thinking about how am I going to prepare my current teams for maternity leave, I'm taking on two troubled teams and trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to heal them, still be there for my other teams, and get everyone now ready for a maternity leave that no one knows is coming, because I was still 6 weeks, I had not shared it. It was a trying time. And to be doing this and building trust with a team, building relationships, mending relationships, improving culture while growing a human is incredible because that is what marked my second pregnancy. It was these two teams plus my incredible teams who are already reporting to me and holding it down while I had to shift. It was a conversation I had with my current leadership team, with the managers who reported to me, to tell them what was happening and that I needed them to hold it down. I told my team members, as well, that's going to be one of my strategies that I'll share momentarily. I shared with my team members directly, so the frontline staff, what was happening and why they may be seeing less of me, but I knew that I had to set boundaries and determine where the bulk of my focus was going to be. I didn't leave them off to the wayside. It's just I wasn't as physically present in their day to day. So we did end up working through it. Other people left, and that was okay. Those transitions were smoother and a lot more respectful in the process. I knew they were coming. Very deep conversations, emotional conversations, but it's a situation that I wouldn't change because I did learn so much from it. I grew an incredible amount from the experience as a leader. And that situation is part of how I know that these strategies that I'm going to share with you work because they have been tested, not just by me, by colleagues, by clients. They have been tested. So we're going to jump into them. The first one is listen. Duh, right? I've said it before, common sense is not always common practice. I have interviewed candidates for leadership positions and they have shared, it's one of the questions I ask is how will you manage the transition as you come in? I'm very protective of my teams. So that is one of the questions that I ask. And it's contradictory to me when you say you're going to listen, but you are also sharing that you have diagnosed a problem and come up with solutions when you don't know the team. So are you truly listening? I'm asking you, are you truly listening? Or are you just listening to get to a place to where you think to justify what you're thinking in your mind so that you can do the thing that you already knew you were going to do? So without talking to anyone, without me disclosing what's happening, candidates are sharing, well, this is what I would do. These are the things I would do. And I'm just like, that's interesting because you don't know what's happening, but you already have a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And of course, those candidates don't make it any further in the process. But I'm asking you, are you truly listening? Not coming in with preconceived ideas as to the issue, even if you are coming from the organization and it's an internal, so similar to the situation that I shared, where you are coming in and you believe that you know what's happening on that team because you've interacted with them, you've heard things, whatever the case may be. Put that away and listen. The next is either meeting directly with the team, scheduling time, or rounding. Depending on how big the team is that you're taking on, you may need to round on different shifts and briefly speak to people um, as you catch them. Or if it's a smaller team, I urge you not just to meet with the leaders of the team, managers, supervisors, but also the frontline team members. This is probably the one time that you're going to get the information that you need. as you are creating and forming a plan in your mind of action. You're creating and forming a plan of mind from a plan of action in your mind from the information that you are gathering during your onboarding process as a leader. So I want you to meet around. This is not a gossip session. Don't fall into gossip. You're asking very focused questions. You can focus on wins. What is something as a department you have been proud of? What is something that you as a team member have accomplished that you're proud of, that you're grateful for? If you had a magic wand, what would you wave and fix? Leave it there. You're not gossiping. And if you sense that it's moving into gossip, use your expertly developed leadership skills to gently redirect so that you are remaining focused. 3, don't rush. Building trust, shifting team dynamics, getting teams to adjust to you takes time. You want to get to know how a team works. Even if it's dysfunctional, you still need to know how the team works. You need to know who has the most influence on this team. Is that influence for good? Is it neutral? Is it negative? You can't do that when you are rushing, quickly inserting yourself, making quick changes, shifting, upending the cart. You will lose every time as a leader. It may not be right away, but it will come back. Not taking the time to build a foundation will come back to you. So, even if you see 1,000 things that you could fix right away, unless they are red flags from an HR perspective, legal perspective, as leaders, you know what I'm talking about. Don't rush. Take a mental note, write it in a journal, whatever it is that you need to do. 4, set realistic expectations with your leadership. As you are onboarding to a new role, again, whether it's internal or you're moving to a new organization, what are their expectations for the first 90 days, for the first 120 days, for the first year? And be sure that what you are co-signing, you agree to. Recognizing that the first 90 days is truly about learning. I can't think of any team department function that isn't complex because they are operated by humans and humans are complex. It will take you at least 90 days to get your footing, to get an understanding of what's happening, to form an opinion, to be involved in what's happening. So be sure that you are building in a buffer and that you are, again, using your leadership experience, using your leadership skill to make that presentation and make a case for why you are saying what you're saying or requesting the timelines that you are requesting. Let them know what they can expect from you. Lean into your resume, lean into past successes, and take them on a journey so that they are in agreement. But be sure that you are all on the same page because then you won't have time. You will rush. You will not be able to meet with team members. You won't be able to truly listening without solving if you are not on the same page as your leadership. So first 4, listen without solving, meet with your team members, and I encourage you to meet not just with the managers or supervisors or, try to get to your frontline team members. If it's small enough team, set 10-minute timelines and meet with them or round, but find a way to speak with them. Focus, don't fall into gossip. Don't rush and set realistic expectations with your leadership team. Those are the first 4. 5, communication. This is another duh, right moment. Common practice, common sense is not often common practice. We often, as leaders, can hide behind a leadership veil. What I'm doing is mysterious. Leadership is mysterious. It's not, okay? There are so few things that actually can't be shared from a responsibility perspective. Go right up to that line. Share what you are doing, what you are working on. More importantly, share the why. And where you can, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it will delay or go slower, even if it opens up for more conversation, ask for opinions, ask for suggestions. Being very clear that you may not be able to fulfill every suggestion, every opinion may not be taken into mind, but it is the act of listening, genuinely listening, and taking suggestions to heart. People want to be heard. They're the ones that are executing the things that you're working on, the plans, the initiatives. So be sure that you're giving them the respect of not just coming and saying, this is what we're doing without a why. That's the worst, without a why, because sometimes there are situations where you will have to say, this is what we're doing, but you can couch it in a why. And so few leaders lose that opportunity of saying why. Increase your transparency, and then be sure that you are circling back to your team members who made suggestions, whether it's you, whether you are delegating that authority to a manager or a supervisor, but that every team member who has given a suggestion is followed up with on what happened with that suggestion. Don't just leave them hanging in the air. 6, quick wins. I know, don't rush, but also get quick wins. So, quick wins. Here's what I'm talking about. As you are rounding with your team members, meeting them, talking to them, hearing conversation, just getting onboarded into the team, becoming part of the team, you're going to begin hearing things like, my office chair sucks. The printer doesn't work. Um, I have to constantly be shaking it for it to work. Or I have to walk 5 minutes just to get toner whenever the toner is out for my printer. Our our office is rarely clean. The carpet in our office hasn't been cleaned for years. This piece of equipment doesn't work. You get the idea. These are all things that I've heard. You get the idea. Those are small wins. Those are quick wins that are not small, that have such a big impact, because often those requests have either just been stuck in bureaucracy. And as a new leader, part of what is great about new leadership is that your leaders are more willing at the start of your tenure to help you succeed, right? Because you're tied to them who hired you. So they want to be sure that you're successful. So get in those requests. This will go a long way for your team. It'll help your leader also look great. It'll help you look good. You're solving problems. So quick win. So I don't want you to rush and try to make big sweeping changes, but things like chairs, cleaning, figuring out different processes, finding ways to fix relationships between teams. So if there's an issue that's happening with another team that's consistent, how can you work with the leader on the other team to see what can be done? Small changes to processes. There you will know your quick wins when you find them. Try to get as many as you can within 90 days. And then whether it's education requests are also a big one too. So listen for these quick wins. That's the listening without solving, so that you're hearing everything and not stopping the free flow of conversation. And my last one, number 7, is to set boundaries. You are a leader. I don't want you to make the mistake of trying to be too friendly with your team members in that first as your first onboarding, because you're just like, well, if I'm extremely nice, then of course they're going to like me. But the opposite often happens. So I want you to set the tone that you're a leader. You are kind. There's a difference between kind and nice. Kind, you are respectful, but you are not their best friend. You are the leader. And as you become more knowledgeable about the team, as you learn more about their daily functions, you are going to have to make hard decisions. And so it's important that you set that boundary from the beginning, that you are the leader, but that you are here to help them be as successful as they can be. You are a listening ear, Again, you respect them, you respect the work that they do, and you will be an advocate for them, but you are still a leader. There are no favorites, even if there might be favorites, there are no favorites. We have to engage as professionals. And I've seen it too many times where leaders go into a situation and attempt to become a best friend, a buddy buddy, to try and make that transition smoother. And it just ends up messy, messy, messy in the end. And then, of course, as you're doing all of this, document it. Document your wins, document your successes, document the significant shifts that are happening as you are employing these steps and as you are gaining and building momentum with this new team or teams in my situation. And this is a great time to share that I am releasing a new product, a planner, a career accelerator planner. This planner is exactly for situations like this, where you are taking on new team members and the wins, your value needs to be documented. And oftentimes we don't realize how much we've done because we're not taking time to write it down. And then we try to remember it as we prepare for an annual review or as we are preparing to request and to have a conversation about salary increases or as we're preparing to move to a new organization or talk about promotion. We forget about all of these things that we've done because we haven't written them down. Or if you're like me, they're like jotted down in in writing that I thought I would be able to read in 1,000 different notebooks. And who has time to go through all of those notebooks and try to find one reference? And often, even when we do write it down, we don't write down what the impact was, what the outcome was, what the return on investment was. So, my business partner and I, Orlando Haynes, we created the Career Accelerator Planner just for you as the corporate professional, for you to be able to have one place that can follow one notebook, one journal, one planner where you are writing down all of your wins, where we are shifting your mindset to build the habit where you are recognizing the power of your value, your intellectual potential, and your intellectual property. We'll be opening up for pre orders soon. So be on the lookout. I'll be sharing across all social media platforms, but we are incredibly proud and grateful for the ability to present this product to you, this planner to you that I know that we both know will bring such value to the work that you already do. And hopefully, as you begin documenting, especially as women, we forget or we minimize what we have done. You will be able to see just how incredible of a leader you are. So those are my 7 tips. Listening without solving. Meet with your team members or round with them. Don't rush. Set realistic expectations. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Get your quick wins in and remember to set boundaries. You are the leader and document your wins. Document the work that you are doing. Thank you so much for being here for episode 24. As I always share at the end, or as I always ask at the end, if you found this episode helpful, and I know that you did, share it with others. We have to talk more about these transitions. We talk about when you get the job, we talk about how to get the job, we talk about how to negotiate, but there are so few conversations on how to navigate now that you have the job as a new leader, how to navigate that leadership transition. It's a big shift, not just for you as the leader, but for the teams that you are taking on. So share freely. We are building a community of influential leaders who are kicking the performance habit and focusing on building influence to increase their visibility. as awesome, incredible, excellent leaders. Thank you. I'll see you next week for episode 25.